Howdy, Aggies! Welcome to the Western Agriculture News. I'm Carmen.
And I'm Sam, leading you to the latest in sheep science.
Did you just say you instead of you?
Listen, these sheep puns are only gonna get bad from here.
Today we're investigating how sheep nutrition affects their ability to conceive and raise healthy lambs.
Because even sheep need a good meal before they go on a date.
Let's check in with our reporters who are speaking with two brilliant NMSU scientists. Over to you before we make more terrible jokes.
Hey, they're not that bad.
Good afternoon. Today we are here with Dr. Gifford, the reproductive physiologist here at NMSU. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Of course. So first off, how does an ewe's nutrition influence whether she even enters her breeding season on time?
So it's a good question, and sheep are unique. So the first thing to understand about sheep is they're seasonal breeders. So they enter estrus during the fall, or what we call a short day breeder. So as the daylight begins to shorten, the ewes will enter cyclicity. So with that, the ewe has to be in the appropriate nutritional status before she'll enter estrus, is what we call it. In all animals, reproduction is a luxury event. And this is to protect the mother. The system's not designed to allow pregnancy to occur unless she's in appropriate body condition score. So the ewe has to be on a good plane of nutrition before she's able to enter her seasonal estrus cycle.
Okay, wow, that's very interesting how nutrition can play such a vital role. Now, tell me, I hear a lot of producers talking about flushing. Can you tell us what that is and what it does to the cycle?
Sure. So another good question. Sheep, typically, unlike cows, where we like to have only a single offspring annually from a cow, sheep we would like to have either triplets or twins, much more so than singles. And so, with that, we try to optimize nutrition to maximize the number of offspring we'll have. So specifically, as prior to the breeding season, we try to slowly increase the plane of nutrition that the ewe is on. And scientific evidence has demonstrated that increase the chance for the ewe to have either twins or triplets if we have this increasing plane of nutrition prior to the breeding season.
Okay, wow, that is very interesting as well. So tell me, if an ewe does get pregnant, how does nutrition during the pregnancy affect the lambs later on?
Yeah, and this has been a relatively new, I'd say within the past 20 or 30 year phenomenon, that it originated with what we call the Barker hypothesis. And this started with studies from those children that survived World War II. Specifically, during World War II, the Dutch cut off supply lines to certain areas in Europe. Of course, there were women at different stages of pregnancy during this period, and they found that when the women had reduced caloric intake, sometimes as low as 200 to 300 calories a day, that the children born to those women had deleterious health effects later in life. So this set the concept for something that we call fetal programming. And we've since done a bunch of studies relative to this. And we've identified that really there's no safe time in gestation to cause a malnutrition state. And so what we can do is alter things like birth weights, muscle deposition, neurological development, cardiovascular development. All of these can be impacted by suboptimal, if you will, nutrition during pregnancy.
Okay, amazing. This is very interesting. Thank you so much for joining us today. All this information should go out to the producers and let them know not to skip their sheep snacks. All righty. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much, Dr.
Yep.
Gifford.
Thank you.
Back to the anchors.
See, that's science, not just sheep romance.
Feed them right, and they'll feed us data.
Please stop.
Hey.
Hello, we are here with Eric, MSU ruminant nutritionist. Hi. So, do you mind if I ask you some questions about sheep nutrition?
I'd love it.
Okay. My first question: what nutrients are essential for successful breeding and healthy lambs?
All of them.
All.
Oh, so if you think about what the nutrients are, you got water, energy, protein, minerals, vitamins. So water is obviously very critical for the life and the health of the animal, but we often take that one for granted. So we assume they're being fed water. But really it comes down to, energy is probably the most important in regards to reproduction because the brain is very sensitive to glucose supply in the circulation in the blood. And so in order to even get the animal bred, they have to be in good energetic status. Now, it's difficult in ruminant animals to separate out energy and protein because as you change those, it stimulates protein synthesis in the rumen by the bacteria. And so they have a steady supply of protein as well. So protein, which is going to be amino acids that are the building blocks of all the hormones and enzymes that are associated with normal metabolism, need to be at the appropriate levels. And then the macro minerals being calcium and phosphorus and magnesium and others, but those are ones that we pay special attention to when we're balancing the diets. And then the trace minerals, particularly copper, zinc, manganese, and cobalt, are ones that have an integral role in a lot of metabolic processes, but also there's data that shows that as we add more to the diet, it increases some of those reproductive hormones like luteinizing hormone, the follicle stimulating hormone, all the things that are involved in getting that animal bred. And so as pregnancy, gets established, making sure that those nutrients are all balanced to that animal's needs. And so we've got lots of documents that record, all the research that's ever been done in sheep nutrition, beef nutrition, horse nutrition. And those provide us with tables that give us very specific numbers. Is that, if it's a 180-pound ewe carrying twins, she needs this much energy, this much protein, calcium, and phosphorus. So work very hard to ensure that the diets that they receive each day, balance all of those. And so, but if they're deficient in energy, you start to have issues with them being able to carry on that pregnancy, especially in later gestation, where the fetus or the multiple fetuses are growing, and that takes a lot of energy to grow those, and then the female or the dam needs that energy to maintain herself, and then as they grow, that rumen or this, there's only so much room in that abdomen, and so if you've got twins in there, that rumen starts to kind of run out of space. And so as they progress through into the third trimester, getting closer to lambing or kidding, we have to increase the energy density and the protein density of the diet and the trace minerals so that, she can't eat as much. And so that one bite needs to have as much, that energy and protein as possible.
Can all of those nutrients be provided by pasture alone, or do you often need to supplement?
It depends on what time of year, right? And so in a situation where it's, green vegetative grass, a lot of times that's going to be sufficient, right? But, most of our animals, right now, this is when lambing is occurring in the fall. And sometimes, depending on the breeding system, right? So like a lot of the show stock are bred in the summer so that they can be giving birth right now, so that those lambs have a little more time to get to a certain age to where, or size, that they can be sold and go into the FFA, 4-H, and show circuit. Whereas more of in a production setting, I do work at the Corona Range Livestock Research Center, and we run about 400 Western white-faced sheep, fine wool, Rambouillets, and so then our breeding season doesn't start until January. And so we're looking May, because that's when it starts to get warm. Grass may start to green up a little bit, but we will have to supplement them. And so we want to, and it really comes down to, you've got to know what you have to know what you need, right? And so that's our recommendation to producers is always, if it's green, that's probably good, but you still should probably test that and send it off for nutrient analysis, looking at all the different things that I've mentioned before, the protein, energy, mineral content, just to make sure, because then otherwise you may have to supplement a bit more. But for the most part, green vegetative grass does a pretty good job meeting their needs. As a nutritionist, I'm out of business during the summer.
Are there any supplements that can be provided to sheep during pregnancy to improve their lambing success?
Absolutely. And, there's commercial products, right? And so feed companies, as they formulate these diets, they look at it from the perspective of, okay, they're going to have some roughage. So a hay, if they're in a dry lot, or maybe if they're out on pasture, and it's very difficult because they just try to have one that you can go to the store and buy as a supplement. And so they'll, just assume that the grass is going to be a certain level, and then you can, they'll formulate it with some very digestive ingredients, or very highly digestible ingredients, I should say. And so that includes, soybean meal, maybe some corn, some barley, uh, cottonseed meal as some protein sources, and they have some energy sources. And, they have recommendations of feeding it, half a pound a day or per head per day, 2 pounds. Depends on what their formulation is. And then some have a complete feed to where you just give some free choice access to some hay and then let them eat all they want, or, you can regulate that. And so there's a lot of options out there. Some can be very expensive, some can be relatively cheap. Our recommendation is always, have a good hay base if you're in a winter situation or in a dry lot situation. And then, you can always make your own supplements, and mixing, an energy source and a protein source. A lot of the things that are available at, say, Tractor Suppliers, you can mix those if you know what the protein and the energy requirements are, and you can do that and figure that out. And a lot of times that's much cheaper, but you're responsible for figuring out all of that. And so most producers just like the convenience of the bag, and so ensuring, going back to that, getting ready for lambing, ensuring that energy density is up, because that intake is going to be down, is the most important thing. And a lot of them will give you details in the feed tag saying, okay, if they're getting close to lambing or during lambing, you want to make sure that they're eating at least this much per head per day, so that they're meeting those needs. So, because the last thing we want them to be is deficient in energy, because then they start to have some metabolic issues and illnesses that now we're trying to get to more health. That's a challenge.
Yes. Last question. What are the most common nutrient deficiencies?
Okay, so energy is generally the most common in a late gestating animal, right? When they're out on pasture, protein in the dormant season, so coming into the winter and fall, that usually becomes the first limiting. And so I'm talking about range ewes that are out grazing. That protein is going to start to decline as that grass goes from green to gray or brown, and it starts to lose that protein more, before the energy, because we still have all the carbohydrates, which is the cellulose and the hemicellulose that was part of that plant. And so providing additional protein to those grazing animals gives those bacteria the building blocks to make enzymes, right? Amino acids. And what we see is a really incredible increase in ruminal digestibility and intake, because it's more digestible, it makes more room, right? And so that protein supplement on grazing animals is important, because it helps them unlock some of that energy that's in there. And as we get in a dry lot situation, it's easier to manipulate the diet, of course, but energy, you start to get things like pregnancy toxemia, ketosis, where they just don't have enough carbohydrate coming into the diet. And so what you have to do is increase the density of that. Like I mentioned before, that helps us get away from those metabolic disorders, because like ketosis, or even like milk fever, as they produce a lot of milk, it's pulling out calcium and energy, as they're starting to ramp up milk production. And if they're deficient in that, then you start to have mobility issues, and you start to get more ketones being produced, and not that we're going to get into biochemical pathways, but they start to mobilize fat, and so the brain doesn't want to use a lot of ketone, even though that it can, but making sure there's enough carbohydrate there kind of helps us alleviate some of those issues. And then, with that milk fever as an example, calcium concentration generally needs to be increased. It makes sense, right? There's a lot of calcium in milk. And then as that starts to become deficient, nerves don't fire the way they're supposed to. And so we often will have like a nice diet with plenty of energy and protein, and then we'll start to add additional calcium to that diet to ensure that they're getting all they. And sometimes if you have triplets or something like that, you've got to be very, very sensitive to watching her behavior, her eating habits, because once they have the clinical signs of, say, pregnancy toxemia or ketosis, it's difficult to get them over that. It is achievable, but it works a lot of effort, and you don't want them to be in that kind of state anyway. So staying ahead of it is much better.
Perfect. Thank you for your time. I
You're-
appreciate it.
So good nutrition and healthy sheep equal more adorable lambs. Huge shout out to NMSU, Dr. Gifford, and Dr. Shitagordis. We hope you had a surely good time. From Western Agriculture News, go Aggies!
Yeah.